It's Wednesday afternoon. That means it's time for our weekly look at politics. I'm Dave Morris here in downtown Oklahoma City from the Oklahoman's video studios. And look at that, brand new graphics floating magically behind me on the big screen. Very nice look. You know, for the past couple weeks, we've touched base with Casteel, our Washington, D.C. based reporter who covers politics from the national perspective up there from the Washington Examiner's office. He's been in Cleveland, he's been in Philly covering the Republican and Democrat national conventions. He's back safely in Washington, D.C. We'll bring him in via Skype. It's the post-convention world, Chris. Are you happy to be home?
I am. Yeah, it was nice. I enjoyed my time in both cities, though. It was really good for me. You know, it's always good for me to stay with the Oklahoma delegations, which I always do. I stay with the delegates that come from the state to represent, the Democratic and Republican viewpoints there and the candidates. And it's really, it's necessary for me to understand, where they're coming from and all this stuff. I'm inside the Beltway. I'm in a bubble, and I'm bombarded with kind of how the East Coast media, views things, and it's rarely in sync with, how people from our part of the world view things. And so from that standpoint, it was really good for me, very eye-opening, and the speeches go on and on a little bit too long, but it's great to be around the Oklahomans who are very active in the Republican and Democratic parties back there, and that's who these people are. Of course, they're activists.
We'll chat a little bit later in this segment about the national politics and is this an issueless campaign that we're seeing brewing here. But in the meantime, let's talk about some of your recent coverage in the Oklahoman, which of course can be found on newsok.com as well. And after 3 straight presidential elections without winning a county in Oklahoma, you write that some Democrats are looking to Oklahoma and Cleveland counties.
Well, those are just the ones, when I went and asked them, can you guys, can Hillary Clinton win a county this time? It's been, so 2004, 2008, 2012, John Kerry, Obama, the Republican candidates won all 77 counties in Oklahoma. And, with Al Gore in 2000, he didn't win a lot, but at least he won some. And so my question to them was, what is this a year? Can you guys break this string? And essentially what they're saying is, if we can, that's probably where we can do it, in Oklahoma and Cleveland counties. And it's important to note, I think I did in the story, that their hope springs not from necessarily the presidential race of 2012 and how Obama did versus Romney in 2012, but more looking at how Mary Fallin, the Republican governor there, did in 2014. In both cases, in Oklahoma County, she barely won Oklahoma County. I think she got 51%. I think about the same in Cleveland County. And I think, they've been looking, the Democrats, both parties really, at how Oklahoma City especially is changing. The demographics.
Is that a reflection, and I think this is where you're going, that the Democrats picking up more of the urban core in Oklahoma?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's young people. It's young people moving in, young people, and who don't, are not Oklahoma Republicans by any stretch. And in Cleveland County, I think the same. I mean, you obviously have the influence of OU there, but I think that influence of young people in OU is diluted somewhat by the fact that a lot of students vote from where they're from.
Right. They may not be residents of Oklahoma.
Right. My kids have always voted absentee, when they've gone off to college. So, but those are the two counties that they see at least hope for, and especially, when you have the libertarian ticket again, which Oklahoma has, Gary Johnson on the ballot this year, on the presidential ballot. He's expected, probably that he will take more from Donald Trump than he will from Hillary Clinton. In Oklahoma, they'll get more of the Republican vote than the Democratic vote. So, I mean, notwithstanding some Sanders supporters, I think, but that could help, they think. They've got this third party sucking even more votes from the Republican and may give Hillary Clinton a chance in, the state's biggest county.
Another story that you had recently in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com was a look at Oklahoma's congressional incumbents and how they spent a lot of money. They spent big to win Republican primaries.
Right. Just in the last 3 weeks, day before the June 28th primary in Oklahoma, all five Republican congressmen, House members from Oklahoma had GOP challengers, and they were anxious. I know because I talked to them, and it's reflected in the amount of money they spent. The five of them spent $900,000 in 3 weeks. Of course, that kind of money, that's all going to TV. When you spend that bit, or broadcast, advertising, TV and radio. When you're spending that kind of money, that's where it's going.
And that's where you see Representative Cole shaking hands with the people, making his appearances. That sort of brand awareness type campaigns.
Right. I mean, some of it goes to grassroots spending, but most of it is in television, radio, and direct mail. I mean, that's where you spend big chunks of money. All of them had blowouts. They all won big. Mark Wayne Mullen, Eastern Oklahoma Congressional seat, had the lowest margin. That was 63%. That's a blowout. 63% is a landslide. So it was a threat that was more imagined than real. But that doesn't mean, and there's just this feeling out there, and you've seen it with I think what they're trying to do is extrapolate a little bit from the success of Bernie Sanders, success of Donald Trump, these outsiders, anti-establishment candidates doing so well, that there was a real anti-incumbent mood out there. And there may still be. We may still see it later in the year, but we didn't see it in Oklahoma. And I'm going to follow up that story with look at where some of that money came from. When you spend that kind of money and raise that kind of money really fast, it's usually coming from special interest groups, PACs. That's where it came from, for the most part.
It's a good look by Chris Casteel at some of the spending that was done back in June. You can check out that story online at newsok.com. And as he mentioned, continuing coverage in the Oklahoman. Getting back to the presidential race, and what we mentioned off the top of this, is this an issue-less campaign? I'm at the gym last night, and there's Anderson Cooper, there's CNN, and prominently breaking news, which didn't really seem to be breaking news, but more of the same sort of storyline we've seen over the past week. Right now it's the cons, but it moves on to something else in a week or two. Issue-less campaign going on, Chris?
I think so. I've yet to see, and this isn't new to this week, although it just seems to be really exacerbated. Since the conventions have all of a sudden have really just become irrelevant, as they tend to be. They're interesting while they last, and we write a ton of copy and do all kinds of things about the conventions. But as soon as you get in the general election campaign, you kind of expect that at least they might focus a little bit on what something that people care about. And I do. That's not just like 100% criticism of the media. They're trying to do a story of the day. The story of the day is the cons and Trump. Back and forth with the cons, and now it's turmoil in the Trump campaign. But at some point, it seems like you got to start talking about things that people care about. The economy, interest rates, Medicare, Medicaid. Healthcare in general. I mean, everything about healthcare always gets boiled down to repealing Obamacare now, which is absurd. And, they really do need to talk about how it's going to be fixed. It's not going to be repealed. They're just not ever going to have the votes, to do that. So there's just not a serious discussion really about anything. I mean, I don't really even consider Trump's proposal to build a wall a serious policy proposal. I don't think Republicans do either. Maybe when we get into the debates and you'll get some serious questions about policy. It's not all going to be about Trump's unconventional, to understate it, campaign turmoil within his campaign and his battle over with the Gold Star families. I mean, I think eventually maybe we will have some discussion about things that people care about. And I really just don't think most people care about this stuff or even paying attention.
It does seem like it's the latest storyline that's a little bit irrelevant, and not to belittle anybody involved in these storylines, but some of these storylines seem a little bit like Pokemon, meaning that a month from now it's going to phase out, and hopefully we get to a little bit of substance. It'll be interesting to see how these debates go and just how much actual issues are discussed and ideas are put forth.
If you want a story of the day, how about a plane load of $400 million in euros and Swiss francs going to Iran at basically the same time.
Happened to coincide back in January, right?
These hostages are being released. I mean, I'm just going by that Wall Street Journal story, which was fascinating. I mean, I read every word of it twice. You're like, what? Wait, what? $400 million in cash. Iranians only seem to be able to deal in cash. If you remember Iran-Contra, I think it was pallets of cash back in 1986 or 87, whenever that operation took place. But it's just the most bizarre story, far more bizarre than anything Donald Trump might have to say today. Is that there was this agreement made about U.S. policy. Nuclear policy toward Iran in 1979, and we're sending an installment of cash. I don't mean to laugh. It's just the most bizarre thing. It just, you read a story like that and you look up and you just go, I feel like I don't know anything that's going on. I mean, 6 months later after this happens, I find out that we sent $400 million in U.S. taxpayer money on pallets in Swiss francs and euros to Iran. Like, okay, what else is going on? Besides Donald Trump's temperament, I don't know.
The Obama administration insisting there was no quid pro quo. Critics, of course, are saying, "Hey, payment amounted to ransom."
I'm not trying to. Right. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's right. They're saying that it was not about. It was not in exchange for those 4 hostages. It was not. It was this previously made agreement that was announced in January. This is a partial payment of, I think, $1.7 billion. It's still just the whole operation of it. That's detailed in this Wall Street Journal story about why the Iranians need cash. It's just fascinating. If you're looking for something interesting to read, it's that story today.
Chris, I agree with you. A lot of times you see the media and you're like, oh, wait a minute, whoa, there was a plane that landed in India or wherever it was that crash landed and everybody survived. Tell me more about that. And then it's back to, story of the day.
I know. Reince Priebus mad at Trump because he didn't endorse Paul Ryan. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess what I've always preached to people, and I need to take my own advice, and probably that starts with getting off Twitter, but is I don't, look around at all sources for your news. We've talked about this before, and we kind of made a point of this earlier this year, and we did a story about this precinct in Oklahoma City and how its voters are going to vote in the presidential primaries in March. We tried to ask everybody that we talked to, that was mainly Matt Patterson. What media do you watch or listen to or read? Just to try to get a sense and to convey, that information. Here is how people's viewpoints are influenced. And it really is has to do with what you absorb every day. Whether you're watching Morning Joe and MSNBC all day or CNN all day, or Fox News. It does make a difference. I talked to this guy, the youngest delegate from Oklahoma at the Oklahoma Republican Convention. He's 19 years old, and I asked him as well. Why are you so conservative? At your age, what were you influenced by? Well, his dad listened to Glenn Beck and Fox News all day long. So, if you really, I guess, want to get a full picture, then maybe you ought to look around and try other media.
It does make sense. I grew up a Dallas Cowboys fan because my dad was a Dallas Cowboys fan, and that's what he always watched. I grew up a fan of boxing because he grew up a fan of boxing and watched it on TV. You mentioned the Oklahoma delegation. Let's touch on that a little bit because you spent a lot of time with the Republicans and Democrats in Philly and Cleveland. How concerned are they with the flavor of the day Trump headlines?
I really don't. I was just talking to somebody about that very thing. As far as the Republicans, I don't think they are that much. I don't think there are many of them who are even say, I don't even know what Fox News is doing today. I mean, I had it on CNN for a little bit this morning. It was all about Trump's turmoil in his campaign. I don't know that Fox News is doing that story, so I don't know that the Republican delegates are that concerned. But I would tell you this about let's say just the dispute with the Khans, the parents of the Muslim soldier who was killed in 2004. I don't think that they would want that that back and forth to be going on. I think they would respect very much that family and the Muslim soldier's sacrifice. But I don't think that they think that that's a huge deal. I don't think that that's something that they're consumed with, that they think that is in some way disqualifying of Donald Trump. And I also don't think a lot of them, because I spoke to them and asked them directly, have any problem with banning Muslims. I mean, that's fine with them. I did a story on that. I did a story asking the delegates about the wall, building the wall, and banning Muslims. And everyone I spoke to was, the Oklahoma Republican delegates, was fine with it.
Interesting. So the delegates are telling you, hey, it's a talking point, it's a storyline, but it's not a tipping point in the campaign.
Well, I mean, I think the media, to some extent, has been trying to find that since last June. June of 2015, when he went down the escalator. I mean, everybody, it's this now. This has got, it's just not going to. I mean, for all those weeks and months leading up to the convention, when Trump was either close to clinching the nomination or had it clinched, there are still media stories almost daily about how they could get to the convention, get rid of Trump, replace him with somebody else. I saw a similar story on CNN today. I was like, it's just almost speechless, really. So they're going to replace their nominee now.
It's interesting. The beat goes on, and our coverage goes on. In fact, we chat with Chris Casteel every Wednesday afternoon. And Chris, I always enjoy the conversation and the context.
Yeah, glad to do it, Dave.
And perhaps there's some nuance you can't find on Twitter. All right, so be sure to check your links and verify your sources, people, when you're following politics online, or perhaps follow your favorite flavor. Either way. More coverage from Chris Casteel can be found online at newsok.com, and his coverage in the Oklahoman as well.